Welcome, Dr. Ali. We're here at ASCRS 2025, San Diego, and we wanted to bring you in for an invitation to interview because you're working on some pretty impressive stuff. And when we go back to your background, you have, starting all the way back in undergrad, kind of a bipolar nature to yourself. It was. Could you kind of explain to us, what did you study in undergrad, and then how did you end up where you're at today?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here, so thanks for the opportunity. When I was in undergrad, I was actually doing a philosophy and physics, like major in philosophy, minor in physics at McMaster University. And essentially, I was always curious. I was a very curious kid growing up, trying to build things, trying to make potato clocks, the whole 9 yards. And that's kind of where I ended up in philosophy, trying to understand why we're all here and what the reason was. While doing that, I fell into metaphysical philosophy, which is basically trying to understand the concept of self through physical elements that exist as well, but also diving into why exactly are we here, how do we perceive reality, and so on and so forth. So that ventured off into a course that I took called Intro to Philosophical Physics, which I thought was very fascinating. So the two actually intertwine. I know most people think they're like two polar opposites, but they're actually not. I feel like philosophy is more of a poetic layering of what physics is meant to be, and physics is a more mathematical layering of what the philosophical is trying to say. So yeah, I fell in love with there and spent about 3.5 years. Actually had a little bit of a tragedy that happened in my life, so took about 6 months off and then went back and completed that.
Do you mind kind of going a little deeper into what was the tragedy?
Yeah, so my dad actually ended up getting diagnosed, ironically, with colorectal cancer at the end of my first year. So me being the youngest and kind of like the only caregiver in the family, I ended up becoming his caregiver. So going to his chemotherapies, going to the treatments, and all that curiosity that I had about, okay, what is life and why are we here, shifted to, okay, we're here, let's deal with it. Now we got this problem, how do we deal with it? What's cancer? What's all these things that I had no idea about. Basically spent some time learning, self-educating, and then spent about 1.5 years with him. He went through traditional rounds of chemo, did the radiation, surgery, the total TNT package essentially. Still didn't work, came back with a vengeance, as it always does sometimes, and then ended up taking him to China because we wanted to try some experimental therapies. He ended up passing away, unfortunately, in January of 2011. So that's kind of when I took the semester off and said, hey, I'm going to focus on other things and figure myself out.
So I'm clear, you were taking care of your father and still studying metaphysics and physics in school. It wasn't until after all that you took some time off?
That's right, yeah. And actually, during that, my first entrepreneurial experience was with my dad. So he was my father, but also my friend. And at 16, we started a business together. So we had a family staffing company, and essentially I was the operating officer. He was the CEO. And all the things I learned from him, we would spend basically all summer standing outside trying to get a contract, trying to get someone's attention, trying to get a meeting and things like that. So that's kind of where I learned. And I think that's kind of where I got my entrepreneurial bug from initially when I was 16. So I was doing that, plus the school, plus taking care of him. And then I also worked part-time, on the weekends at Style Sense in Hamilton. So yeah, it's a very busy time.
And then from there, you get through undergrad and you decide to go to medical school?
Yeah, so basically that was never my plan, right? To be really transparent. My plan was I wanted to do a PhD in philosophy and physics and become a professor and live under a tree, right? But essentially, because of that tragedy, there was a thought in my mind that, hey, I wanted to give back, right? So one of the things that happened with him was essentially negligence on his part, and also just this social aspects of, I guess, getting cancer, right? So my dad had rectal bleeding for a while, ignored it, didn't want to talk about it, big old man, doesn't want to go for a rectal examination and things like that. So I felt like, if I could have helped change that narrative, it would have been a South Asian woman that's sitting in front of the patient. Maybe it's a South Asian individual, and I could break that barrier. So that's kind of where the thought came, that, hey, I should go into medicine, become a family physician, all right? Plot twist, I fell madly in love with surgery, actually, thanks to Dr. Rapanos over at McMaster University. And actually, I was in my family medicine rotation down in Memorial Hermann in Houston, Texas, where a patient came in and needed a CABG, coronary artery bypass. And my attending at the time was like, you look really bored. Just go check out the surgery and see what happens. Worst mistake of my life, because then I was like, oh my God, this is what I want to do. And then, the physician who was there at the time allowed me to restart the heart. So when you basically have this potassium injection, you're massaging it so you can restart. So that experience never left me. And for me, that was something so profound where you could take arts, science, and physical elements of treatment and like have an impact on patients. Because the next morning he woke up and the only thought in my head was, I had my hands in his chest. And that was like this moment for me. So essentially, fell in love with surgery, pivoted, took all my rotations, all my electives, everything into surgery. Did radiology, trauma research, etc. And while I was doing vascular surgery in Canada, went back to McMaster, full circle for me, I started doing an analysis on PMMA beads. So these are beads that are used in orthopedic surgery at the moment. You put antibiotics inside them, etc. So I was tasked as the, third or fourth year med student with reading 7,000 abstracts, right? So that was my job, going through all the abstracts. And while doing that, I realized there's a pattern. And the pattern was that these beads only last about 7 days. They don't release enough and they don't biodegrade, which means you actually have to go back and retrieve them in those patients. And we were trying to repurpose those beads for vascular surgery, right? So like when grafts go down, prevent infections and things like that. So we realized that, hey, that's not really going to work, right? So after a week of no sleep, being in the OR, you know how it is, right? Reading through all these papers, I was there in the OR, and we're doing this carotid dissection, and I'm looking at like this material in my hand, and I'm just, really kind of out of it, 3 espressos deep, and I'm thinking, what if we were able to put like drugs inside a material like that, and then print it and tailor it so that it sits perfectly inside this carotid? And that's actually literally what I yelled in the OR, and my attending was like, hey, you need to like get out of here. I thought I was getting punished, but he's like, you need to get out of here and you need to go and do some research. So spent about 2 years at McMaster University, with the stem cell center there, trying to understand, okay, what different materials exist, right? This is back in 2017, so 3D printing was not a big deal. Not a lot of people understood what was happening. So trying to basically find that PI and that support to help do the PhD and so on and so forth. Realized 2 years later, I don't have the tenacity to do a PhD. It's not me. I'm not built that way. And essentially, graduated from medical school, and one of my attendings took me out for dinner and wrote me a check for $10,000, and that was the birth of Biosapien. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know when I was in the research realm, it's interesting because I don't think that our modern research realm is really built for innovation. Like it seemed like, I always tell a story, I'd gotten some early grants from societies, but when you look at like NIH, they said, well, you have to have 3 or 4 publications proving viability before you can even apply for an innovation grant. It's like, how innovative is it if I've got 4 papers or 5 papers saying it already works? So if you're thinking at that level, you really almost have to kind of go out on your own.
Yeah.
And so you get this $10,000, and then where's it go from there?
Yeah, so I got the $10,000 from Dr. June Marshall, OBGYN down in Houston, Texas. And then a couple of friends and family were like, hey, you've started businesses in the past, you're passionate, you're crazy enough. And actually one thing I remember Dr. Marshall saying to me, she was like, there's enough surgeons in the world, and if this fails, you can always come back and become a surgeon. I was like, that's true, I could always come back. To be fair, it's been 10 years, Jeremy. I haven't been in an OR, so I think I have to hold that over Dr. Marshall because I'd never made it back. But yeah, anyway, so I got to 10,000, a couple of friends and family, they wrote small checks, 5K, basically got 35,000 and thought, okay, what do I do now? I'm in Houston, Texas. There's no innovation happening here. I don't know anything about biotech. I'm gonna go to New York. And the reason I went to New York is because, it's gonna sound silly, but it really is Jay-Z. If you make it in New York, you make it anywhere. So my thought was, it's the hub of the world, right? It's the place where you have Wall Street, you have capital, you've got biotech, you have investors. There's things happening there. So what if I go there? And so that's exactly what happened. So June 2018, I ended up in New York and essentially started formally Biosapien 2.5 years later from the original idea. And I basically got thrown into the world of biotech, had no idea what it was, and just attended a lot of networking events, met a lot of people, took a really interesting course called Entrepreneurship Labs in New York City. It's sponsored by the state of New York, and essentially what they did is provided me with a mini MBA over a course of, I think it was 6 or 12 weeks, something like that, like 3 or 4 months. And the goal of that was to understand, okay, what is a financial statement? What is financial projections? What's market value? What's valuations? So that kind of element of business, even though I had entrepreneurial experience, I didn't have that depth of business knowledge, right? That was something I didn't acquire. My businesses that I did were very small and, they were meaningful for the time being, but it wasn't trying to build a unicorn. So that's what I was really trying to understand. And then in December of that year, a couple of months later, I met somebody who was at a networking event, very well known in the biotech industry space, has a family office, very well known family. I won't name drop, but essentially ended up having great conversations with him. He thought I was smart. He's like, I'm going to give you a job as a consultant. Look at this company. Tell me what you think of the tech, right? So that's kind of how I started my venture capital experience, and essentially became a consultant, then became an analyst, then became an associate, then became a senior associate, then became a partner.
So let's walk back for a second.
Yeah.
So you basically do a 8-week course in business. Now you have this background, of course, in physics and philosophy, and then you have a small window in business. So I'm sure you took a lot in that 8 weeks, and now you're in venture capital.
Yeah, it was a very weird turn of things. Honestly, I didn't expect that. But I think in venture capital, the key thing is, look, you've got people that have money, right? I think there's 3 pillars to what it takes to build or utilize venture capital, right? You've got the money, which is important, so that's capital. You need the people that actually know how to infiltrate that industry and understand the ins and outs of what it makes it to be successful, right? That wasn't me. And I didn't have the capital. What I did have was a core fundamental part, which is the science. So I was able to look at technologies and assets and small molecules and say, okay, this small molecule is working on this receptor, and this receptor has this pathway. I love biochemistry, right? So I still love the Krebs cycle. So
you're the one.
And neuroscience and things like that. So really understanding, what the pathways were and how the pathways could be implemented and the impact of the small molecule, right? So looking out for risks. So for example, if you have, a receptor or a drug that's targeting, a receptor on a RBC cell, the first thing you think of is, okay, is this going to cause thrombocytopenia? You're going to get DIC. Those are the big things that you look for, right? Then you start looking at the data of the animal studies and you say, okay, well, did that happen in the animals? What's the tox like, etc. So it was about getting curious. And I think that's kind of where I, not accelerated, but probably excelled in, because I was a very curious person by nature, right? Yep. So that element with the science backing and understanding of all the medical aspects of things, and then a little bit of that business helped me to understand, okay, this is what it was. So initially, when I started in VC, it was all just science. It was me translating, Nature papers for really rich dudes, right? and telling them what the paper says and how this could potentially be a success or not, or if there are these risks that occur, then this is how we mitigate those risks down the line in clinic or whatever the case is. So I did that for about 2 years at an analyst level position, really understanding, and everything that I understood there, I basically took and applied to my company. So all the things that, for example, that we did in due diligence, right? So market analysis, okay, competitive landscaping, looking at intellectual property, understanding the regulatory aspects of a product and how it's actually going to get through it. Then at the end of it, is it actually going to get reimbursed? Is there a pipeline that you can actually tap into? Is it a monopoly, or is it more of a market that's saturated? And if that's the case, then how are you going to differentiate? So learning those things, I think, really, really helped me. And I think without that, I would not have been able to.
And when you talk to doctors or surgeons in particular, what do you think, what aspect of that field do you think they really just don't understand?
I would say that that surgeons understand the unmet clinical need, which is something that VCs don't. So there's something really powerful in that. But I think where the few physicians that I've had conversations with, where they kind of miss the mark, is really understanding, okay, how does this fit in a market from a potential of getting reimbursed, right? So understanding the difference between a device reimbursement and a drug reimbursement is enormous, right? Because as a venture capital, you want to invest in a drug because it yields more profit, right? you don't want to invest in a device because it doesn't yield enough revenue and it has some IP implications, and there's a whole element of like adoption, whereas a drug, that's not the case. The drug ends up getting absorbed into a larger, orange book or whatever the case is, and is pushed out by policies and advocates and things like that, whereas a device may not have that. So that's one example, right? Another example is like financial projections and things like that, right? So just the business element, I think, is really kind of something that I've seen is missing, I would say.
And where do you see the current venture capital model as failing in terms of development for new devices and new drugs? Because you just said, if there's not a good enough market for it, because you're trying to optimize your money.
Yeah.
So if you're not going to be able to optimize, venture capitalists, you're looking at 15 different options, and 3 of them are probably going to be your preferred ones because of return on investment. What happens to those other 12 that may be good ideas, but how do we get those to market? How do we develop those if we're in medicine and venture capital doesn't want to be a part of it?
I think it's a great question. There's different ways and avenues that you can get something funded, and I think that's the misconception as well, right? Is that people think the only way to receive funding is through venture capital. That's not true, right? You have angel investors, which are basically like smaller individuals, like my attending Dr. Marshall wrote a $10,000 check, to kick things off. You have grants. You have institutional investors that are not venture capital. So think of like, UC San Diego. They have a trust fund that has a venture fund that has a, endowment fund, et cetera. So there's different institutional avenues that you can tap into. So I think that's one angle, but just to target that question directly, right? From a VC standpoint, VCs are really smart with their ability to get money from people, right? That's essentially what they do. They're managing other people's money. What I feel like some VCs lack, or actually probably more than some, more than half of them lack, is the understanding of how that product is going to have a clinical fit, right? They think, oh yeah, let's target the biggest and the most expensive market, for example, right? Like let's go after oncology and let's target lung cancer because it's the most common, it yields the most funds, it has the most market shares from a pharmaceutical perspective, right? Not realizing that yes, you have about 250,000 patients there, but if you look at the rest of the market, you have about 400,000 patients in all the other cancers. So understanding why niche or rare disease also needs to be treated and impacted is something that I think venture capital lack, right? Like venture capitalists don't have that insight of that, and they don't know how to deal with it because they just see the bottom line. So I think a perfect venture fund for me is essentially a fund run by physicians, right, that understand that element with engagement from pharma and someone who understands the financial aspects of it. Like that's a perfect team where you have the science, the capital, and the people all together.
Yeah, and my understanding, this has been kind of the complaint for a lot of like pediatric cancers and more very rare ones, where 500, 600 people may get it a year. There's no real reason to invest if you're an investment bank or, a venture capital group or anything. And so where do you go for funding if you're looking at, you said big groups, so would it be like a UC San Diego or like a nonprofit or?
Yeah, a nonprofit would be a great example of that. Another thing you could do, which is not very commonly done in biotech as a whole, is crowdfunding. Right, and you see a lot more biotech companies in that space, right, that are going towards crowdfunding because they're targeting things like pediatric innovations, right? So pediatric innovation itself is just really interesting. I just want to peel that back a little bit. The issue there is really just a regulatory one, right? Trying to get a pediatric voucher and trying to get reimbursement for the pediatric space is really difficult, right?
Can you delve into that more? Like, why is that one so much different?
It's going to sound really terrible, but there's not a lot of money that you can make from curing disease in children. It sounds horrible, but that's the reality of it, right? So from a reimbursement insurance perspective, like if let's say like MediChip, the device, the product that we have, right? If we were to put that in pediatric, we may only yield 10% in profit. And yes, that's meaningful, and even for me, that's meaningful. But from a venture capital perspective, it's not, because essentially what a fund is trying to do, right? Let's say you have $100 million, that $100 million fund, you're taking 20 shots, right? Like you mentioned, there's 15 or whatever the case may be. You're hoping that only one of those is an actual success. So it's kind of like adult gambling in a way, right? Where you have to take the best shot possible, and 92% of all venture capital investing, they fail. So like a lot of startups, more than 90% startups fail. So you have to be really picky on what you're taking that shot at. And because it's you on the line as a GP, as a general manager, managing other people's money, you have to also be mindful. So I think a way that venture capital funds can actually improve innovation in these areas is to have a mandate that says, okay, 18 out of 20, we're going to take shots that are going to make us filthy rich, but we're going to take these 2 shots that have impact and that have a pediatric component to it. And I think that's where you kind of get a shift that could potentially occur.
And you said 92%, correct?
Yeah,
I mean,
92%. It's actually higher, actually. I think it's like 96 in some places.
Really?
Yeah, so 1 out of 20 companies end up failing.
And you weren't just immersed in this, and you had done, how many deals did you do while you were doing that?
So we did 33 in total. We took 3 companies public, took some assets out of pharma, spin them out, and then basically create venture studio style, so create new companies as a result of that. Yeah. And out of those 33, 2 of the companies have like completely shut down with 0 return, and the others are just kind of floating around.
Really?
Yeah. 3 went public, so they were successful. Yeah.
And from your standpoint, that would be considered good? As
Yeah.
like 10%, a little?
Yeah, for sure.
That's quite impressive.
Even just the one going IPO was like a 300x return.
Really?
Yeah.
And so when I talk to doctors, I think surgeons, doctors, either one, what I've noticed is that I feel that they always think their idea is brilliant, but they have no idea like how it fits in anything else, and they don't even look at the numbers at all. Like they always come in and it's like, I have this great idea and it's going to change the world, and then you're like, well, walk me through the market for it, and they have none. Like they have no idea what the market is, they have no idea, but they expect that they're just going to walk into a room and people are just going to hand them a bunch of money to do it. Have you faced that issue, or have you ever seen that?
I've seen that a lot, yeah. I mean, I've seen that a lot on the VC side of things, I would say, where you end up getting, like deans of universities coming over and saying, this is the best idea that we ever have, and but then you peel back the layers and the slide deck is just nothing but animal studies, right? So like there's no market traction, there's no market analysis, there's no competitive landscape, there's no, okay, how are we actually gonna get your money back? There's no, these are the use of proceeds that we need. Like, what are you doing with the money? What's the milestones that are going to be achieved? How are we going to multiply the $100,000 that I give you? How's that going to grow in value to being 1 million or 10 million? Like, those are the things that I think are lacking. I think universities like UC San Diego and others, they have entrepreneur programs where they're now getting into the place of like tech transfer and showing people how to take their discoveries and then spinning them out and things like that. So I think it's slowly moving into that direction, but I think there needs to be more of it. And I think surgeons need to be a little bit more mindful of the understanding that yes, you can create amazing things, but if they just sit in your garage on a shelf, they're not really having that impact that you want. So either you have to do it yourself, which is the building, the startup, and learning all that, or you become smarter about it and you start partnering with guys like you have in the exhibit hall, right? You can sell it to the Medtronics or the Boston Scientifics of the world, right? And that's also another business model that you can apply without having to learn the competitive landscapes.
Yeah.
I would say.
No, that's unbelievable. And let's move forward to your current company and what you're working on now.
Yeah.
Could you kind of describe to us what your big, I mean, you went into it with the carotid, but where is that going from there?
Yeah, so I think Biosapien itself, right, if I were to give you the pitch, we are aiming to treat cancer locally, right? So that's kind of what we do. And the lead product itself, we have several products, but the lead product itself is called MediChip. And essentially there's no mechanical component into it. Just want to make that very clear. That's just the name of it. But essentially it's a 3D printed drug delivery platform that has slow release that you can control depending on what compound or duration you want, essentially, right? If I were to simplify it, well, because the crowds, or the audience is surgeons, I don't need to simplify it, right? So it's essentially like a hernia mesh that has therapeutics inside it, and it degrades over a course of 30 days. And like I said, we can change that to 60, 120, etc. But the initial product is 30 days, and the idea is that you would provide local therapy to the site and suture this thing on to the actual tissue itself. And if I may peel that back a little bit, the reason why that actually came into being was when I was down at Memorial Hermann in Texas, one of the things that I did was we were part of a lot of Whipple procedures. So the thing that I noticed there was, a patient would come in, you do a CT scan, MRI, whatever the case is, PET scan, and you think the tumor is the size of like, a golf ball, right? You spend 4 or 5 hours getting to the pancreas because of how retroperitoneal it is. And essentially what you realize is like it spread like wildfire. You can remove some of it, but the rest of it is still like growing. It's on arteries and nerves and things that you can't really touch. So as a surgeon, and I can't speak for all, I can only speak from my experience. And I wasn't a surgeon, I was a medical student at that time, right? But for me, that was so heartbreaking for the patient, but demoralizing for me, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like as a surgeon, my mindset was go in there, cut it out, remove it, fix the problem, instant gratification, I'm done, right? I walk out the door, I save someone's life. And when that didn't happen, it chipped away at something in my mind, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Where I was like, how is that possible? Like there has to be something better. There was nothing in my hands that I could use. So the idea is that MediChip came from the birth of that concept, right? Is that if you're in the OR and you're in this tricky spot and you want to treat the patient and you think you can downsize the tumor or relieve their symptoms or potentially prevent life-altering symptoms or surgeries, what you could do is put this chip inside at the site, suture it on, and let it provide some treatment. So you as a surgeon can say, okay, yes, I tried to do something.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the birth of MediChip, I would say. How it works in itself, it's basically composed of 3 biomaterials. So think of like PLA, PLGA, those kind of things. And essentially those are polymers. We take those polymers, we've figured out the right molecular weight. So we spent about 2-3 years figuring out what the right weight is that causes that release to occur. And then essentially we 3D print it so that we can have a personalized component. And down the line where this product is going is that we plan on using AI to basically review and scan those patients, CTs, MRIs, imaging, take that data, figure out, okay, does this look like Texas or does this look like Italy, right? And basically print a therapeutic patch that's targeted towards that patient's tumor modality, right? And like potentially add some histopathology elements to it where you're now screening and figuring out what the right chemotherapy treatment is for that. I mean, that's a little further down the line, but that's kind of the idea of why we chose 3D printing, so that we could utilize personalized medicine and then also do cocktail delivery. So one unique feature in our product is because it's made up of 3 components or 3 materials, they all degrade at a different time, and therefore you get a beautiful biphasic release. So one of the issues is with drug delivery platforms is that you get a release after 7 days, it plateaus, right? Because the zero order kinetics ends up flatlining, right? So what we've been able to do is, okay, after the 7-day mark, the second biomaterial starts degrading, and then you get a really beautiful continuous release until it plateaus at 28 days. So that's kind of one element of the technology itself. And as a result of the biomaterials, we can do cocktail delivery. So we haven't tried it yet. We've only done, we only had 2 drugs so far, so 5-FU and gemcitabine. And there's a reason for why we picked those. I can peel that back if it's helpful. But essentially, delivering 5-FU and gemcitabine within one chip or one product has not been done before. So that kind of puts us on the competitive edge from a differentiation standpoint when we go out to VCs, for example.
So are there any limitations from which types of drugs you would be able to use in this platform?
That's a great question. So as of right now, we are bound to small molecules. We are exploring in the lab ways to deliver biologics, and we do have a entire patent portfolio that's been issued on stem cell delivery. For the stem cell delivery aspect, we have no idea how to actually use it and what the market use is, and I think that's kind of where I can resonate with surgeons.
Yeah.
Where I don't understand how to apply this thing in a way that's scalable enough to be able to generate those revenues and manage that risk mitigation profile, right, for VCs. But biologics is definitely the next thing that we're going after.
Yeah, I know from a stem cell standpoint, it could be difficult. When we were looking at this, because we use autologous, the FDA is going to treat that. Anything where you apply it becomes a drug delivery system, and then it falls under the drug pathway. At least it did, 5 or 8 years ago, and then it completely changes the research requirements for that. And so I think that, obviously you're the expert in this field, but I think that where you're at with the drug delivery is probably going to be more than capable of solving some problems without having to go down that other pathway.
For sure.
But, I'm not the guy to speak to that though.
Yeah.
but that being said, so unlike the previous orthopedic beads that you've been working with, this goes away entirely. Like it's 100% gone when it's all said and done.
Yes and no. So initially, the way the product is that the goal was that you would just leave it inside the patient and it would degrade over time. So that degrades over 6 months time frame. When we started the company, we were actually a pancreatic company. So I just want to highlight that. We didn't start with colorectal cancer. We wanted to target that situation that I was explaining with the Whipples. And essentially through an NSF phase 1 grant, we realized after doing 100 KOL interviews with physicians from MSK, MD Anderson, Vanderbilt, etc., that the right market is not actually pancreatic, but it's colorectal. And the reason why is because in the event something goes wrong, it's very difficult to go back in and retrieve the product from a phase 1, phase 2 perspective. So we wanted to be able to find a patient population that had the least sort of risk that's associated with actually applying the product while having the highest unmet need aspect to it. So it was between esophageal, oral, and rectal anal. And we chose rectal anal because of the life impact and like the sort of quality of life aspect of it as well.
So this really brought everything kind of full circle for you then. So it goes
in a way, yeah, unintentionally. I mean, it wasn't intended to be that way. So I think that was very interesting for us because the part that you mentioned about the drug device regulatory pathway, like that's one element that I think I also want to peel back a little bit. So because we're a drug delivery platform, it falls under the drug and we're not a device. So the reason why colorectal surgery or colorectal cancer, ended up being the main lead instead of oral was because of the fact that you could go back in and take it out through that window of opportunity. So in rectal and anal cancers, and of course you guys can tell me better, but my understanding is that there's no consensus, or it's a moving consensus of target of whether radiation goes first or chemo, or short-term RADs versus long-term RADs, etc. And because of that, after the TNT treatment, there's a window of opportunity of about 30 days or 45 days where the patient has no treatment and you wait and see.
Yeah.
We thought that was the perfect opportunity for us to be able to target those cancers or lesions that are left behind while still not messing around with the standard of care, because we didn't want to change and implement or have any impact there.
Yeah.
So that's actually how we ended up justifying the colorectal market by saying, okay, there's a unique clinical element that we can fast track from a regulatory standpoint, and we don't have to change the product, and it can still work and have that impact.
No, absolutely. And I do want to go back, because this is something more for the general population. I think that they have a tough time, or when I deal with patients, and I wouldn't have understood this until I became a surgeon, why can't we just cut everything out? Why can't we just cut pancreatic cancer out? Why can't we just cut the colorectal cancer out? No matter where it's at, just take it all out.
Yeah.
And can you kind of go into why we need multimodality therapy?
I mean, that's a great question. I think that's the easier solution, right? To just go in and say, yeah, let's just take everything out. It's not possible, because cancer itself is a disseminated disease, right? And that's something we're not like oblivious about, right? We all know that, right? And I just want to make that very clear. When I say we want to treat cancer locally, we're not trying to replace systemic chemotherapy either. We're just trying to provide another tool to be able to target cancers that need local therapy, right? So I just want to clarify that. But to jump into that, I think what ends up happening is, like, if you are looking at pancreatic cancer, you can't remove the entire organ, right? Because the organ itself has some functionality as well. That's one. The second part, in pancreas at least, is that you'd have to remove like 4 other organs just to be able to complete that. So then quality of life and all those things end up having an impact as well, right? So it's not really sustainable or feasible to be able to say, oh yeah, let's just cut everything out and remove everything, right? That does happen, I would say, in about 40 to 50%. So half of the patients, you can go in, you can cut things out and you can remove it. But I think there's some situations where you need to have unique innovations. Like, for example, if you're looking at hepatic cancers, right? There's something called a Y90 that's now used, where you have these radioactive beads that get sent through the hepatic vein, and they then release chemotherapy directly to the site, because you can't remove the liver. You need the liver to do your daily activities and to actually like survive. Yes, it regenerates, but you still need a piece of it, right? So I think the purpose of multimodalities and the way you can treat different diseases using different things is crucial, because there's no one size that fits all for all patients, right?
Yeah.
Like, patients may have cancer in the rectal canal, and the only option there is to cut out the rectum and give them a colostomy. Well, that's poor quality of life. Now we're saying, what if there was a way that we could apply a product like MediChip directly onto the site, spare your rectum, and still get to the treatment? I think that's a win-win.
If there's anything, it's spare the rectum if you can.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I think every patient wants that.
Exactly.
So I think I want to end it with all you've been through. You've seen this now from all these different angles, from the venture capital side, from the medical side, physics, pick it. What is the thing you have learned, like you really would say, I would say wisdom versus knowledge, like thing you don't get out of the textbook, but that if you hadn't gone through this process, you just couldn't have understood?
Honestly, Jeremy, I think I'm writing a book on that because there's so much, and it's so hard to simplify that into just like a few sentences for you. But I would say, if I can give practical advice that I've learned,
Oh, please do.
I would say this: it always takes twice as long as you think. It's going to cost twice as much money. Everything that you think can go wrong will go wrong, and all the things that you didn't think about also will go wrong. And the biggest and the strongest characteristics that you can have as an entrepreneur that's in the space is grit and resilience. And I think if you wake up every day thinking that this thing is going to change the world, and you drive that, eventually you get enough people who also follow into that vision and can help you become or achieve, make that a reality, I would say. If I were to summarize, I mean, there's so much.
And how much funding have you received?
12 million to date.
Yeah, so there are people who have bought into yours, and
yes.
obviously there you go. So
So
I
far,
do
so
think
good.
there is something about it, just taking it one step at a time. Like every day,
Yes.
wake up, just take another step forward. Because
Yes.
the people you're competing with are the other people, they're not, at some point they're not going to take that step.
No, but you have to. I think that's what differentiates people from having an idea and actually executing and doing something, right? You can have amazing ideas, right? I think that this would be my one message. Like, if you have an amazing idea and you really, truly believe in it, then do it, you
Yeah.
know? And like, if you need help, ask people, you know? I'm happy to help. Like, if it's an amazing idea that can impact people, we're happy to do it.
Oh, and I would say I completely agree with you. One, if I've learned anything, it's that if you want to create something new that other people can't see yet, or be an entrepreneur, most of the time people will find the reasons why they can't do it. And
Yes.
you have to. I think you have to look at it and say, those are just problems I have to solve, and somebody else has solved them, and I think I can solve them too, or I can find the right team of people that can solve them.
Yes.
But everybody will tell you what's going to fail. They're all going to tell you the things why it's not going to work, and you have to be willing to say, yeah, that's just another problem that I need a solution to.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just on the aspects of failure, there's two things that I'll say, right? One, failing is the best thing you can do because you learn from it, right? So like, I've started businesses that have failed, and I've learned things like, oh yeah, market analysis is important.
Yeah.
You know, knowing who's actually going to purchase this product is important. And the second thing I'll say about failing is, if you're going to fail, right, especially from a clinical R&D perspective, fail fast and do it cheap,
Yeah.
right? So like, find the easiest, lowest hanging fruit, as we call it, right?
Yeah.
And from an R&D preclinical perspective, that a study that you can design that will be able to tell you, is this a go or a no-go?
Yeah.
And that probably costs $25,000. And then from there you can build.
Yeah.
That's what I
No,
would say.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's
of
been
course.
very impressive, all the things you've accomplished. And I hope, just for patients' sake, for colorectal surgery's sake, for everybody, that what you're doing actually works so that we can see the advantages of it.
I hope so as well. Yeah, we have a clinical trial coming out that's starting in the next quarter, so we'll see.
Well, congratulations.
Fingers crossed. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you very much. So, once again, ASCRS 2025. Welcome to the cutting edge.